Hello, my name is Suzanne. On Thanksgiving, I was fighting for my life in the ICU when my own family stood over my bed and said, "We don't claim her." They walked out as if I was already gone. A week later, they returned, smiling, expecting to take everything I had left. But what they opened wasn't an inheritance. It was the truth I had written with my last strength, and that truth shattered them. Do you want to know what I wrote? Chicago always feels different on the night before Thanksgiving. The air hangs heavier, as if the whole city exhales into the cold, leaving the streets coated in frost and a silence that makes you notice every passing car. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my gloves stiff with the chill, watching the tiny flurries blow across the windshield. Everywhere around me, red brake lights stretched down the expressway, families rushing home, minivans loaded with groceries, kids' faces pressed against foggy glass. I wasn't just another driver. I was the youngest child in a family that never seemed to know what to do with me. Every Thanksgiving, I imagined it would be different, that the table would open, that someone might say, "Suzanne, it wouldn't be the same without you." And yet, every year it was the same awkward small talk, my presence tolerated rather than embraced. This time, though, I had baked my own pumpkin pie, carefully spiced, crust golden. I balanced it on the seat beside me, like a fragile peace offering. I kept repeating what I would say when I arrived. "Mom, I thought maybe this year I could bring dessert." I hoped she'd smile, even just a little. Ian Levanzant once said, "Family is supposed to be your safe haven. Sometimes it's the very place you find the deepest wounds." Her words lingered in me as I drove, headlights cutting through the icy dark. I felt it in my bones, the tension of wanting to belong to a place that never welcomed me fully. I thought about Mom's kitchen, the smells of sage and butter, the steam rising off her sweet potatoes. I rehearsed telling her I'd been promoted at work, that I had managed to keep my apartment even after bills piled up, that I wasn't as lost as they thought. Being the youngest always meant being underestimated. Lyora, my older sister, was the one they praised. Nix, my brother, the one they leaned on. I was the afterthought, the one you asked to fetch water, never the one you asked to carve the turkey. But this time, I had something to give. The pie wasn't just food. It was my way of saying, "I'm still here. I matter." And in my purse sat a card I had written carefully, every word chosen to be both gentle and true. "Mom, no matter what has happened, I am thankful for you." The roads shimmered with patches of black ice. My tires hummed uneasily. My chest tightened as I gripped the wheel, whispering, "Don't let me crash now. I need to show them I matter." The words barely left my lips before the car jolted. The spin was sudden, like being pulled by an invisible hand. My headlights whirled across the snowbank, then the metal guardrail. The sound of shattering glass erupted around me. The pie shot off the seat, smashing against the dashboard. Orange fillings smeared across the interior like a cruel joke. My scream caught in my throat, swallowed by the impact. The world went white. Then black. For a moment, I felt as though I had been floating, weightless, untethered. Then pain roared back, sharp in my chest, ringing in my ears. My head slumped against the seat, blood dripping warm down my temple. The pie box lay crumpled in the floorboard, the crust shattered, the filling scattered. That pie was supposed to be my voice, my offering. Now it looked like nothing more than waste. I thought of the table I would not sit at, the chair that would remain empty. A sickening despair clawed at me. Maybe this was all the proof they needed, that Suzanne never arrived, Suzanne never counted. Voices pierced the fog, doors slammed, boots crunched against icy gravel. Light cut across the wreckage. "She's alive, but critical," a voice shouted. Hands tugged at me, straps tightened, air colder than the night rushed into my lungs. I drifted in and out as paramedics spoke over me. ICU, possible head trauma, family contact. Something slipped from my purse as they moved me. The card. My last olive branch fluttered to the asphalt, soaked in the blood from my forehead. The words I had written for Mom were barely legible now, ink blotted, smudged into red streaks. They lifted it, placed it gently beside me on the stretcher. The irony was unbearable. My message of gratitude had become a symbol of tragedy. I wanted to speak, to say, "Please, don't throw it away." My lips moved, but no sound came. The siren wailed above me, pulling me into another wave of unconsciousness. When I opened my eyes again, I was staring at a ceiling too bright to be kind. The sterile glare of fluorescent bulbs pressed down like judgment. Machines beeped in erratic rhythm, each sound reminding me I was still tethered to life. Cold air hissed through a tube in my throat, and I realized how fragile breath could be. I turned my head slightly and saw it, the smashed pie container tucked in a plastic bag at the foot of the bed, a nurse perhaps too kind to discard it. My heart sank. All my hope, all my careful effort, now sat as a reminder of failure. Sometimes you don't know how strong you are until being strong is your only choice, Bob Marley once said. Those words, once a motivational quote on a coffee mug, now felt like prophecy. My body was broken, my pie destroyed, my car drenched in blood. Strength wasn't a choice, it was survival. The antiseptic smell clawed at me, making me nauseous. I blinked at the monitor lines, trying to find meaning in the jagged green peaks. Thanksgiving had started in kitchens across the city, but for me, it began under fluorescent light, tied to tubes, my pie in ruins. I closed my eyes and thought, even if I survive this, will they even care? I remembered childhood birthdays when Leora's achievements were praised, Nix's milestones celebrated, while mine faded like background noise. I remembered the year I made cranberry sauce from scratch, only to have it pushed aside with, "We already have enough." Each memory stacked like bricks, a wall of proof that I was never enough. The bloody card sat on the table beside me. I clung to its image with my eyes, as though staring at it might tether me to the idea that I still belonged to someone, somewhere. The irony gnawed at me. The very words meant to bridge the gap between us were now unreadable, tainted by the accident. Lying there, I told myself, this time, they'll see me. I almost died. Surely that must matter. But a deeper voice whispered back, colder than the hospital air. No, Suzanne, they've been blind to you all along. I thought lying there half dead would finally make them see me. I was wrong. The first sound I remember was not the steady beeping of the monitors, but the voices, muffled, low, speaking as though I wasn't there, though I was right in front of them. I tried to shift my body, but it refused to respond. The sharp smell of disinfectant filled the back of my throat, and the fluorescent lights above me blurred together in painful halos. I wanted to reach out, to announce myself. I'm here, I hear you, but the tubes and my own weakness held me silent. The doctors spoke about me as if I were a case study. She's critical, we need consent for intervention. Another voice asked, where is her family? I expected warmth, comfort, the sound of footsteps rushing to the bedside, hands wrapping around mine. Instead, what settled over me was a coldness, like ice water poured into my chest. I strained to see through my hazy vision, listening harder, praying that familiar voices would mean I wasn't as alone as I felt. Shapes sharpened at the edge of my vision, 3 silhouettes forming near the foot of my bed. Relief washed through me. They had come. My siblings. Maybe, despite everything, I mattered enough for them to be here. I blinked until the faces cleared. Leora, standing tall and composed, her arms folded, her mouth set in that expression she used when she'd already made up her mind. Nix lingered just behind her, gaze sliding anywhere but me. Cameron stood to the side, hands buried in his pockets, his jaw tight, expression unreadable. My heart fluttered weakly in hope. They came. Maybe they care. Maybe the accident erased the old bitterness. I wanted so badly to believe this wasn't another scene where I was invisible. The doctor, voice calm but urgent, addressed them. She's in critical condition. We need you to sign for extended care. We can stabilize her, but she needs family to authorize. Leora's eyes flicked to me for the briefest second, then away again. Her lips parted, and the words that would shape me more than the accident itself slipped out sharp as a knife. We don't claim her, she said, voice firm. She's not our responsibility. For a heartbeat, I thought I had misheard. Surely no one could say that. Not here, not while I lay in a hospital bed fighting for breath. But the silence that followed told me I hadn't imagined it. The doctor's brows furrowed. Excuse me? This is your sister. She needs immediate authorization. Without intervention, she may not make it. Nix shifted his weight but said nothing. Cameron stared at the floor. Leora's tone only grew sharper. We've done enough. We don't owe her more. She made her own choices. Let her live or die by them. I felt the crash all over again, but this time inside my chest. My bones had broken on black ice, but these words shattered something far deeper. I had expected rejection in subtle forms, a cold glance, a half-hearted thank you. But this? An outright denial of blood ties, of my place in the family? It was beyond cruelty. It was erasure. Ernest Hemingway once said, "The most painful thing is losing yourself in the process of loving someone too much." Lying there, listening to my own blood disown me, I understood what he meant. I had loved them too much, begged too long to belong. And in return, I was discarded like a stranger. The doctor tried once more, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Do you understand what you're saying? This isn't about convenience. She is alive, aware, and she is your sister." Leora's face hardened. "No, she was never really one of us. You can keep her alive if you want, but don't expect us to take part." The doctor turned his gaze to me, and in that moment, I knew he understood. I was listening, trapped in my body, absorbing every word. His eyes softened briefly, filled with something between pity and outrage. It was the look you give when you've witnessed something you wish you hadn't. And I realized, humiliation can wound deeper than broken ribs. My accident had left me tethered to machines, but their words left me untethered from family itself. My crash shattered bones, but their words shattered me. The silence after their declaration was deafening. I could feel the judgment in the air, not against me, but against them, and yet no one spoke for me. No hand reached out. I closed my eyes, forcing breath through aching lungs. If they won't claim me, I will claim myself. I remembered every holiday where my name was skipped in toasts, every gathering where I was pushed to the edge of the photo, every time I offered love and was met with indifference. The pieces fit together now, forming a picture I could no longer deny. Thanksgiving was always about them, never about me. Today proved it. The grief of that truth settled heavy, but beneath it flickered something else. Resolve. I would not beg again. Not for recognition, not for love that came with conditions. If my survival was to mean anything, it would not be to crawl back to those who had erased me. It would be to stand without them. Their footsteps broke the silence. Heels clicked against the hospital floor, deliberate, unhurried. The sound of their leaving was the sound of judgment, like a gavel striking down a verdict I never asked for. I tried to etch the sound into my memory, not to torture myself, but to remind me of the day I was finally cut loose. Thanksgiving morning, and I was left to die, not by fate, but by choice. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was watch the doorway grow emptier, the distance between us final. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter, and they never even looked back. My vision was smeared with tears that refused to fall. The room blurred in shades of white and gray, the sterile walls of the ICU bending around me like I was caught in some cruel dream. My family was still there, hovering like shadows at the end of my bed. My sister's words, "We don't claim her," still echoed, bouncing inside my skull, louder than the beeping monitors. Yet in the haze, I clung to a shred of hope. Nix, my brother, shifted on his feet. His shoulders rose and fell, his jaw tightened, and for a fleeting second, I thought he might say something. My eyes locked on him, begging silently. "Please speak. Please tell them I belong here." Sometimes all it takes is one voice to stop a train wreck. I thought his might be mine. Nix parted his lips. The faintest breath of a word trembled on them. I held my breath, waiting, desperate for him to defend me. Then I saw it. The subtle movement that changed everything. Leora's hand reached back, almost casual, her manicured fingers pressing lightly against his arm. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was command. And just like that, the spark of courage died in her shadow. His mouth closed, his eyes flicked away, avoiding mine as though they burned. I wanted to scream, but my throat gave me nothing. Inside, though, my soul cried out, "Nix, don't let her do this to me." But silence filled the space where his voice should have been. crushing, suffocating silence. He folded his arms tightly across his chest, head bowing slightly like he had already accepted defeat. To anyone else, it might have looked like neutrality. To me, it was betrayal. Silence isn't harmless, it's a weapon. It wasn't just that Leora declared me unwanted, it was that Nix, who could have contradicted her, chose not to. I had learned growing up that silence in my family was never neutral, it was a verdict in itself. And here, in this sterile room where life and death were weighed, his silence screamed louder than her words. They didn't just abandon me, I thought. They erased me with silence. Later, when the family had stepped back for a brief moment and the tension in the room thinned, a nurse leaned down beside me. Her voice was soft, meant only for me. "He looked at you, honey," she whispered. But then he turned away. My chest tightened. It was one thing to feel the rejection, another to have it confirmed by a stranger. She had seen it too. My humiliation was not private, it had been performed before witnesses. The thought was unbearable. Even outsiders recognized that my family had refused me. The nurse adjusted my blanket, her hand lingering just long enough to let me know she saw me in a way my own blood didn't. But the shame clung anyway. I wanted to disappear into the sheets, to erase myself before they could erase me further. Lying there, I turned my anguish into resolve. If my brother can't claim me, I must claim myself. I thought of all the years when my name had been skipped in conversations, when I'd been treated as a placeholder rather than a person. Birthday gifts forgotten, milestones ignored, small victories diminished. Each memory stacked on the other, a pattern I could no longer deny. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Silence becomes betrayal when it stands by injustice." Now I understood that in my bones. Nix's silence wasn't neutrality. It was betrayal. And that betrayal cut deeper than broken bones or bloodied skin. I felt something shift inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of a seed breaking through soil. Sadness curled into defiance. I would not beg for their recognition anymore. The sound of their leaving was final. Heels clicked, soles dragged, the echo carrying across the tiled floor like a drumbeat in a funeral procession. Each step was a nail hammered into the coffin of the daughter I once was to them. They did not glance back, not even once. No whispered apology, no look of hesitation. They left as though I had never existed at all. Alone with the machines, I lay still, my breath shallow but steady. I realized then that death was not the cold waiting in my veins, nor the damage in my body. Death was abandonment, the moment you realized you had been erased while you were still alive. That day I learned, silence can kill more surely than any accident. The silence that settled after Nix looked away was heavier than any weight I had ever carried. The machines hummed steadily, their rhythm growing louder, each beep thudding against my chest like a cruel reminder that I was still alive when my family had already dismissed me. I had always thought silence was peace, but in that room, surrounded by the sterile glare of hospital lights, silence revealed itself as a verdict. My mind clung to the hope that maybe one of them would speak up after all, maybe Cameron, maybe Nix. I wanted so badly for someone to contradict Leora, to soften her words with even a whisper of doubt. But the stillness stretched, expanding until it felt suffocating, and the truth solidified. Silence is complicity. The only thing louder than their cruel words was the absence of their defense. I lay there, staring at blurred figures, my throat raw from the breathing tube, unable to cry out. The verdict was final, carried not just in the words spoken, but in everything left unsaid. When they finally moved toward the door, I thought they would at least leave in silence. But then Leora's voice, calm and cold, cut through the air like a blade. "We have dinner waiting." The words landed with a force that eclipsed the accident itself. Dinner. She was talking about turkey and stuffing, about cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes, while I was lying broken, held together by tubes and wires. Thanksgiving dinner took precedence over my life. The doctor froze mid-step, his face a mixture of disbelief and restrained anger. He looked from them to me as though silently apologizing for what he had just witnessed. That look mirrored the devastation tearing me apart inside. I whispered in my mind, to them, my blood meant less than a turkey in the oven. And I knew then that there was nothing I could do to change their choice. They weren't leaving me for an emergency. They were leaving me for dinner. When the door closed, the sound echoed like a final judgment. My eyes shifted, blurry but determined, to the corner of the room where the smashed pumpkin pie box still lay. The nurse must have tucked it aside rather than throwing it away. The sight twisted my gut. That pie had been my bridge, my olive branch, the proof that I was willing to carry something meaningful to the table. Now it was nothing but crumbs and filling smeared inside broken cardboard, a symbol of rejection, of effort wasted. The nurse who had whispered to me earlier noticed my gaze. She bent down, picked up the box gently, and set it on the counter as though it deserved dignity even in its ruined state. "I thought maybe you'd want it close," she murmured. Tears stung my eyes, though my body was too weak to produce them. That pie was my voice, and they left it to rot. As the machines ticked on, I thought about what Thanksgiving was supposed to mean in this country. Gratitude, family, forgiveness. In every American home, people were bowing their heads over meals, speaking of blessings. But mine had chosen a meal over me. Oscar Wilde once said, "After a good dinner, one can forgive anybody, even one's own relations." The irony burned me. My family chose dinner over forgiveness, dinner over love, dinner over life itself. I lay there thinking about past Thanksgivings, Mom carving the turkey, Dad leading grace, laughter floating over the table. I had believed those moments meant something, that even if I was overlooked, I was still part of the whole. But in this sterile room, I realized that Thanksgiving had always been an illusion for me. Gratitude was a word they reserved for each other, not for me. Humiliation curled in my stomach, but beneath it, I felt a spark. A thought so sharp and clear, it cut through despair. If they can leave me for dinner, I can leave them for life. For the first time, I imagined a life without their shadow. No more begging for scraps of affection, no more trying to fit into a frame where I was always cropped out. If I survived, I would not crawl back. I would not ask again to be part of their table. Resilience began to rise quietly, the way embers glow long after the fire seems gone. I realized that strength is not always loud. Sometimes it is a whisper in the darkest room, saying, "You are still here. You are not finished yet." I made a vow in silence. I would never beg them to see me again. But as that defiance grew, the sound of laughter filtered faintly from the hallway, staff talking about their own dinners, their own families waiting at home. The contrast struck me like a cruel joke. Somewhere across town, my family was raising glasses, passing dishes, smiling for photos, while I lay in a hospital bed listening to machines breathe for me. My hand twitched near the broken pie box, a reflex I couldn't control. It looked almost like I was reaching for it, clinging to a broken dream. I thought of how something so small, pumpkin pie, had carried so much weight, and how its destruction mirrored my place in their world. That was the day I learned some dinners cost more than blood. After they left, the room seemed even colder than before. The silence pressed against me, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that empties you out until you're nothing but a shell. Machines clicked, hissed, and beeped around me, the rhythm steady, indifferent, as though reminding me that the only company I had left was mechanical. My eyes wandered to the pie box on the counter. Broken, crumpled, the filling long since hardened into an ugly smear. That box was my last effort to belong, and now it mocked me. I let my thoughts whisper in the void. If blood won't stand by me, who will? It was a question I had asked for years in subtler ways. Every time I bent over backward to earn approval, every time I swallowed disappointment to keep peace. In this moment, with IV lines in my arm and tubes holding me to life, it echoed louder than ever. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but the truth gnawed at me. The people who should have been my safe harbor had turned their backs. Oh, it felt like drowning in plain sight. The door creaked. My body tensed instinctively, bracing for the sting of their voices again, expecting another knife disguised as words. I almost couldn't bear to look, but when the figure stepped in, it wasn't them. It was Ember. He moved quickly, almost stumbling, his jacket still dusted with snow, his cheeks flushed red from the wind outside. His eyes darted straight to me, widening with alarm at the sight. I had not called him. I had not begged anyone to come. And yet, there he was. Relief rushed through me like warm water after frostbite. For once, someone came without being asked. He set his bag down on the chair and leaned forward, resting his hands on the bed rail as though to ground himself. "Suzanne," he breathed, voice shaking. "Thank God you're awake." His face carried something I hadn't seen all day. Genuine worry. He didn't hesitate. He reached for my hand. I felt the warmth of his skin, rough from the cold, covering my limp fingers. The sensation startled me. After a day of tubes, latex gloves, and the absence of touch, it felt like sunlight. "You're not alone," he whispered. "I'm here." For a moment, I wanted to laugh through the rasp in my throat. Family had abandoned me, declaring I wasn't theirs, but here stood someone outside that bloodline claiming me with conviction. It struck me then what I had always known but never lived. Belonging doesn't always come from the people you're born to. Sometimes it comes from those who choose you. His words reminded me of something I once read. Sometimes it takes only one person to believe in you for you to start believing in yourself. And maybe this was that moment. Ember pulled the chair close to the bed. He looked around the sterile room, his eyes falling on the pie box. He didn't ask, didn't probe, only offered me a small nod as if to say, "I see you. I see what it meant." Then quietly, he bowed his head. His hands still held mine as he whispered, "Lord, thank you for keeping Suzanne alive tonight. Thank you for her strength, even when the people closest to her walked away. Remind her that her life has value, not because of who claims her, but because of who she is." His prayer was simple, not rehearsed. Between each sentence, he paused, speaking softer encouragements that only I could hear. "You matter. You are loved. You're not finished yet." I thought about my family gathered around a dining table somewhere, bowing their heads over turkey, pretending gratitude while discarding me. And here I was, lying broken, but receiving a prayer that felt more nourishing than any meal. They had dinner. I had prayer. And somehow, mine felt richer. As his words washed over me, I felt a change stir deep inside. For hours, I had floated in despair, convinced their rejection defined me. But now another truth began to push against the darkness. If I can't be their daughter, I can still be myself. Their rejection was not the measure of my worth. Their silence was not the definition of my story. I thought, if they won't see me, then I'll see myself. If they won't love me, then I'll find ways to love myself. The small spark of defiance grew, flickering stronger than the weakness in my body. I realized surrender was not in my nature, not anymore. Night fell beyond the narrow ICU window. The world outside glowed faintly with streetlights reflecting off snow. Inside, Ember stayed by my side, his hand steady in mine, the anchor I didn't know I needed. I whispered inside myself, words I could not yet speak aloud. They may abandon me, but I will never abandon myself again. That night passed without family, without dinner, without the warmth of a home. But I was not alone. For the first time in a long time, I felt tethered, not to those who disowned me, but to hope, to resilience. That night, I found my anchor. But anchors don't stop storms, they hold you steady through them. When Ember left the room to grab a sandwich, I thought the air might feel lighter. But instead, the stillness thickened. The machines hummed on, steady companions to my uneven breath, their rhythm both comforting and cruel. Without him there, the emptiness stretched wider, filling every corner of the ICU with loneliness. I let my eyes drift to the window, where the night sky gave way to the faint glow of dawn. Thanksgiving was ending for everyone else. but for me, it had barely begun. I whispered in my mind, maybe Thanksgiving is over, and so is my place in their story. It was a thought that stung because it carried the weight of truth. I was not at their table. I was not in their grace. I was suspended here, neither fully alive in their hearts, nor allowed the dignity of being remembered. The calm was fragile, like glass ready to crack. And then it did. A nurse stood at the corner of my bed, her phone lit up against the sterile gloom. She scrolled absently while checking the IV drip. I wasn't trying to pry, but my eyes caught the glow of familiar faces. There they were, my family, glasses raised, mouths stretched into wide smiles, cheeks flushed from wine. Lyora at the center, head tilted just so, as though she owned the room. Nix and Cameron flanked her, their hands full of food and drink. Even Mom was there, smiling wide, framed by golden light and laughter. The caption burned into me more than the photo. Thankful for family. My chest tightened, the beeping on the monitor spiking to match the frantic pounding of my heart. My throat worked around the tube, a desperate sound caught inside. They hadn't just left me at the hospital, they had already erased me. I was not dead, but in their picture, I might as well have been. It took everything I had, but I pushed sound past the tube, a whisper broken and raw. Am I not family? The nurse startled, nearly dropping her phone. She turned, eyes wide, caught between her duty and her humanity. Tears welled as she looked down at me. She didn't answer. Her silence was answer enough. My question hadn't been meant for her anyway. It was aimed at the faces frozen in that picture, at the people laughing over pie and turkey while I lay in a hospital bed, tubes keeping me tethered to a life they no longer claimed. Her tears fell where their words never did, and in that moment, I knew even strangers could see the cruelty of my erasure. Memories surfaced, sharp and relentless. I had always been at the edge of photographs. At birthdays, Lyora in the middle, Nix grinning beside her, Cameron leaning in. And me, cropped at the side, half a smile, half a presence. The family picture on the nurse's phone was just a cruel confirmation of what had been true all along. Elie Wiesel once said, "The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference." I finally understood the full weight of that sentence. Hate at least acknowledges your existence. Indifference does worse. It makes you vanish. That was their gift to me on Thanksgiving. Indifference so sharp it cut me out of the frame altogether, but bitterness alone wouldn't carry me through. Somewhere beneath the pain, another thought began to form, steady and defiant. If they can erase me from pictures, I can write my own story. I would not remain the blank space on their walls or the forgotten name at their table. I would build my own record, one they couldn't crop out or delete. The anger inside me did not blaze. It smoldered, steady as coal, turning grief into resolve. Silence could be weaponized, not against me, but by me. I began to imagine words etched in ink, words that would outlive their denial, a testament, a truth, something they would one day have to face. The idea took root, small but solid, in the soil of my pain. I closed my eyes, letting the nurse adjust my blankets, pretending to sleep as tears slipped down the sides of my face. The machines hummed on, my broken heart beating in stubborn rhythm. Even invisible people bleed, I thought. The truth of that sentence echoed through me with every pulse. That night I stopped trying to fit in their frame. I would make my own. Morning filtered into the ICU through the narrow blinds, dull gray light spilling across the sheets. I hadn't truly slept. Every time I drifted, I woke again to the echo of their laughter from the photo I'd seen, the caption that named everyone but me. Ember had stayed the night, slumped in the chair by my bed, his jacket still draped across his shoulders. He was the only figure that made this room feel less like a cell. I studied him for a moment, his quiet breathing steady, his presence anchoring me. Pain lingered, raw, unhealed, but under it, something else had begun to stir. Their betrayal was still a wound, but now it sparked a thought sharper than grief. I don't need to beg for a place in their story. I can leave my own behind. The clarity of it caught me by surprise, but it felt truer than anything I had clung to before. I shifted slightly, my eyes catching on the tray at my bedside. That was when I saw it. The pearl hairpin. Cheap, scratched, the same one Leora had once given me years ago with a mocking smile, telling me it looked pretty even if it wasn't real. For so long it had been meaningless, tossed aside in drawers, forgotten. Now it gleamed like a relic, a symbol that demanded my attention. My fingers trembled as I reached for it, the plastic cool against my skin. Something inside me hardened. This little trinket had been her joke, her reminder that I would never measure up. Today, it would become mine. I whispered to myself, if they can twist silence into abandonment, then I'll turn silence into truth. The idea grew quickly, steady, and insistent. I would write a letter, not a plea, not a cry for pity, but my testimony. My words would live even if I didn't. They thought they could erase me, but I would etch myself into permanence. Ember stirred as I tried to sit up. His eyes snapped open, filled instantly with worry. Suzanne, don't push yourself. I shook my head weakly, holding up the hairpin. No, this matters. My voice rasped against the dryness of my throat, but determination gave it weight. What do you want me to do? He asked softly. Help me write. The nurse brought a notepad at Ember's request. My hands were unsteady, the IV making it impossible to hold a pen. So I dictated, each word pulled from somewhere deep. Write this down exactly, I told him. I began with the truth, the crash, the pain, the way their words in the ICU had gutted me more than any wound. I spoke of the photo, their celebration without me, their caption that declared them thankful for family as they cut me out. But I didn't stop at recounting pain. I wrote of resilience, of what it meant to fight for breath when those who should have held your hand chose instead to turn away. I wrote of betrayal, but also of strength, the strength to rise from it, even if I never left this bed. I paused only when the weight of memory grew heavy. Ember looked at me, pen hovering, waiting for me to continue. I whispered, "This isn't for them to feel sorry, it's for them to face the truth." By the time we finished, my chest hurt from the effort, but inside I felt lighter. The words existed now, no longer trapped within me. If I don't survive, I told Ember, this will speak for me. I folded the letter carefully around the hairpin. Together they formed my testimony, my broken childhood gift now transformed into a seal of truth. A nurse I trusted entered quietly, checking my vitals. Her eyes softened when she saw the letter. I held it out with weak hands. "Please," I asked, "keep this safe. Promise me it won't disappear." She took it gently, pressing her hand over mine. "I'll make sure it reaches the right hands, Suzanne. You have my word." For the first time since the accident, I felt something rare. Safety. My truth was no longer confined to my body. It had a witness. I let my head sink back into the pillow, relief washing through me, fragile but real. Lying there, I thought about what people usually leave behind: wills, money, possessions. But none of that felt meaningful now. My legacy would not be measured in what I owned, but in the truth of what I endured. Legacy is not money. It's the truth you leave behind. I pictured them one day reading my words, forced to face what they had done. Maybe they would deny, maybe they would laugh, but the truth would already be out. They could not silence me forever. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I had spent years consenting, shrinking myself to fit the small space they allowed me. But now, even confined to this bed, I refused to give that permission any longer. I closed my eyes, the memory of the hairpin vivid in my palm. They had declared war in silence, walking away, cropping me out, erasing me. My response would be silence too, but not defeat. It would be silence sharpened into strategy, silence sealed in ink and memory. I whispered to myself, they thought silence meant defeat. They never understood silence could also mean strategy. Sleep pulled at me, but it wasn't the restless sleep of despair. It was the calm before a storm I knew was coming. a storm I was finally ready to face. A week in the ICU is a strange thing. Time bends and warps, nights melt into mornings, and days stretch endlessly under the sterile hum of machines. My body healed in small increments, each breath less ragged, each heartbeat steadier. But my spirit was slower to mend. Emotional wounds don't respond to IV drips or oxygen masks. Ember was constant, returning every day, his face always etched with a quiet determination to make sure I didn't feel abandoned. Nurses rotated in shifts, doctors checked charts, but Ember stayed. His presence became the rhythm I trusted most, more steady than the beeping monitors. For 7 days, my family stayed away. Not a card, not a call, not a question asked about me. I almost convinced myself they would never return. Perhaps their silence was their final word. And yet, some part of me braced. People like them don't vanish for long. They circle back, not for love, but for what they think can be gained. And I was right. They came back, but not for me. The door opened late in the morning, and the air in the ICU changed instantly. They walked in with clipped tones and the faintest air of irritation, as though this visit was a chore they had postponed too long. "Has there been any update?" Leora asked briskly, ignoring me and speaking straight to the nurse. Her voice was devoid of warmth, her posture that of a lawyer cross-examining a witness. Cameron muttered under his breath, his eyes flicking to the machines. "She won't last long. We need to know what she left." I froze, absorbing the words that landed harder than any fall onto black ice. 1 week ago, they had stood here and denied I was theirs. Now they came back to collect. The contrast was unbearable. Their cruelty hadn't softened with time. It had calcified into greed. Ember shifted in his chair, his shoulders tense, his jaw tight, but he remained silent, watching. He knew me well enough to understand that this was my moment to absorb, to record every hypocrisy, every lie. They tried to mask it, of course. "How are you feeling, Suze?" Nix asked without looking at me, his gaze glued instead to the chart at the end of my bed. His voice was flat, like someone reading lines in a poorly rehearsed play. "I hope the doctors are treating you well," Cameron added, his tone dripping with a false sympathy that only sharpened the insult. I studied their faces. None of them met my eyes. Their attention shifted from machines to notes, to the envelope sitting on the counter, to anything that wasn't me. Their performance was clumsy, their hypocrisy stinging worse than outright rejection. I realized in that moment that their disdain had always been obvious. It was my hope that had kept me blind. Some people are not loyal to you. They are loyal to their need of you. That truth, once abstract, now breathed in the room with me. They weren't here because they cared. They were here because I still had something left to give. The hospital's legal counselor arrived not long after, a clipboard in her hands, her tone neutral but firm. Leora's demeanor shifted instantly. Her face softened, her voice cracked at just the right pitch, and her eyes welled with tears. Fake tears. She dabbed at her cheek with a tissue, sniffing delicately. "We did all we could for her," she said, voice trembling with rehearsed grief. "You can't imagine how hard this has been for our family." My blood boiled. Those words weren't for me. They weren't even for the counselor. They were for the papers in her hands, for the signature lines waiting to be filled. She wept for the papers, not for me, I thought, fury thick in my chest. The staff exchanged glances, nurses, aides, even the counselor herself. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't buy her act. The cracks in her mask were visible, but still, she clung to the performance. I wanted to shout, to rip the tube from my throat and expose her. But my silence was stronger than her tears. I fixed my gaze on Leora, letting my eyes narrow, letting my glare hold all the venom I couldn't voice. My body might have been weak, but my silence had teeth. Ember's hand found mine under the blanket, squeezing once. Solid, grounding. He didn't speak, but his presence gave me strength. Inside, I made a vow. They think I am powerless. They have no idea what waits for them. I thought of the letter tucked safely away, sealed with the hairpin. I thought of the nurse who promised it would reach the right hands. They believed my silence was compliance, but in truth, it was preparation. Let them smirk, let them count my breaths like currency. Their reckoning was already written. As they left the ICU, their voices dropped into hurried whispers. "Divide assets fairly," Cameron muttered. "She'll want her wishes respected," Leora replied, her tone sly. Nix added, "We'll need to make sure nothing's overlooked." I closed my eyes, listening to the greed in their footsteps as they faded down the hall. To them, my breath was currency, my silence, an invitation. But I knew the truth. The bill was coming due, and they would choke on it. The wheels of the chair squeaked against the polished floor as the nurse pushed me down the corridor. The sterile white walls of the hospital blurred past, yet every sound was sharp. The shuffle of shoes, the faint cough from a nearby room, the murmur of nurses exchanging notes. My body was still weak, every movement sending a ripple of exhaustion through me, but my mind was sharper than it had been all week. I knew where they were taking me. Ember walked beside me, his hand resting lightly on the arm of the chair, steadying me more with his presence than his touch. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "I do," I rasped. My voice was fragile, but conviction gave it weight. When we entered the conference room, I felt my stomach tighten. The air was already thick with tension. My family was there, seated stiffly around the table, whispering to each other in hushed tones that carried no compassion. Their eyes flicked toward me, not with relief that I was still alive, but with irritation that I was still present. At the center of the table lay a sealed envelope. The hospital's legal counselor set it down with deliberate care, her tone even but serious as she said, "This contains Suzanne's wishes." My heart thudded in my chest. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The counselor's words sharpened the air. "Your sister's directives are here. They will be respected in full." I watched their faces transform. Leora's lips twitched, almost into a smile, her eyes gleaming with certainty. Cameron leaned back, exhaling as though victory had already been secured. Nix avoided my gaze, his hands folded on the table, but his foot tapped restlessly beneath. They exchanged glances, quiet, greedy confirmations that they believed what lay inside would belong to them. I could read it in the way Leora straightened her blazer, in the way Cameron muttered, "Finally, some closure." I thought bitterly, they don't see me. They see a bank account with a heartbeat. My fingers twitched against the chair's armrest. I wanted to scream at them, to shatter their smug anticipation, but I remained silent. My silence was no longer their weapon. It was mine. While the counselor shuffled papers, Cameron leaned toward Leora, his voice just loud enough to reach me. "Finally, her life will be useful." The words sliced through me, sharper than any scalpel. For a moment, I forgot the machines that kept me steady, forgot the weight of tubes pressing against my throat. My heart burned with fury. Ember's fist clenched on the table, his jaw locked tight. The counselor stiffened, her eyes darting toward me, then back at Cameron. The disgust in the room was tangible, though my siblings were oblivious. Inside, my resolve hardened. They would learn just how useful my life had been, not in the way they hoped, but in the way truth has power when it finally comes to light. I breathed shallowly, but each breath carried a vow. I would not let their cruelty define my ending. The counselor broke the silence. "Let us proceed." Her hands gripped the envelope, breaking the seal slowly, methodically. The room quieted, anticipation pressing down heavier than the fluorescent lights above. Leora leaned forward, elbows on the table, her eyes unblinking. Cameron tapped his fingers against the wood, impatience wrapped in arrogance. Even Nix's head lifted, curiosity sparking through the shame he tried to hide. I watched them closely, memorizing their faces, the greedy tilt of their mouths, the hunger in their eyes. These were not the faces of family. These were the faces of betrayal, waiting to be rewarded. My breath quickened. Suspense gripped me tighter than pain. The envelope tore open, and for the first time in days, I felt anticipation not of despair, but of vindication. The counselor unfolded the papers inside and began to read. "This is the testimony of Suzanne Vale," she said clearly, her words, her directives, and her legacy. Instead of bank statements or property claims, my words filled the room. I had written of the night in the ICU, of their voices saying I wasn't theirs, of the way they abandoned me for dinner while machines kept me alive. Every line cut through their facade. I had left nothing unsaid. The photo where I was erased, the silence that had betrayed me, the truth of how I survived not because of them, but despite them. Then the counselor held up the pearl hairpin, wrapped with the letter. Gasps escaped the room. This, she continued, is the symbol Suzanne chose to leave behind, a reminder of false promises and the reality she endured. I watched their faces blanch. Lyora's hands gripped the table until her knuckles whitened. Cameron's smirk faltered into something ugly and exposed. Nix dropped his gaze again, unable to withstand the weight of truth. They thought I was silent. I was writing. The room cracked with silence so sharp it rang louder than words. Their smugness drained away, leaving only pale faces and trembling hands. Mother's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Her face sagged with something between shock and shame. Leora's nails dug into the table's edge, her mask slipping in front of the very people she wanted to impress. Nix slumped back, his shoulders collapsing, his head bowing low. For once, their silence was my justice. I sat in my chair, tubes still tethering me to life, but inside I had never stood taller. I didn't need to raise my voice. My words had already spoken for me. And as the air thickened with humiliation they could no longer disguise, I whispered inside myself. But the collapse had only just begun. The room had gone still after the last line of my letter was read. The weight of silence was suffocating, not because it came from me, but because, for once, it pressed down on them. I watched each of their faces carefully, savoring the disbelief etched into their pale expressions. Lyora's mouth twitched as though forming a rebuttal, but no words came. Cameron leaned back stiffly, his bravado faltering. Even Nix, who had perfected the art of looking anywhere but at me, lowered his eyes to the table, shame tugging his shoulders down. I felt it then, a shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. For the first time in my life, power was no longer tilted their way. The truth, raw and undeniable, weighed more than their greed ever could. I had been powerless in their eyes for years, erased and diminished, but now my silence had spoken louder than their denials. Inside me, a steady voice rose above the ache in my body. The truth weighed more than their greed. The sound that broke the silence was my mother's gasp. Her hand flew to her chest as her body pitched backward into the chair. "Mom!" Nix shouted, half rising, while Leora scrambled toward her. Cameron cursed under his breath, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped against the floor. The counselor stepped forward, urging calm, but chaos had already erupted. My mother's eyes fluttered, her skin drained of color, her chest heaving shallowly. The sight might have undone me once, her collapse might have filled me with panic or guilt, but as I watched her falter, I knew this was not from my words alone. She collapsed not from my words, I thought, but from seeing herself in them. It was as if her body mirrored what had just happened to the family illusion, brittle, hollow, crumbling under the weight of truth. For years, she had been the center, the figure who glued our fractured lines together. Now, even that image cracked. The nurses rushed in, checking her pulse, voices urgent, but I stayed still, my eyes unflinching. For once, it wasn't me who needed saving. The counselor, composed despite the tension, lifted the paper again. Her voice was clear, cutting through the panic. "And this is Suzanne's final directive." The room quieted instantly, all eyes darting to her, waiting, trembling. She read, "You left me to die. Now nothing of mine will ever be yours." The sentence fell like a blade, slicing the last threads of pretense. Leora's face drained, her lips parting soundlessly. Cameron's fists tightened, the rage in his eyes betraying the fear beneath. Nix closed his eyes altogether, head bowed, as though the shame finally consumed him. Beside me, Ember sat steady, his presence a rock in the storm. He didn't gloat, didn't even smirk. He just held my hand as though reminding me I was not alone. The contrast between his quiet loyalty and their loud hypocrisy was almost too much to bear. Inside, a fire lit in me. Vindication, righteous fury. They thought me useless. They thought me erased. But these words will outlive their lies. Lyora tried to recover first, her voice breaking as she stammered. This is manipulation. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying. Her words faltered under the weight of the letter that was undeniably mine, written with intention they could not erase. Cameron slammed his palm on the table, muttering a curse, his bravado cracked open. But even his anger rang hollow, the rage of someone whose mask had slipped. Nix did not speak at all. His silence, once a betrayal, now looked like surrender. His head hung low, his face shadowed in shame. I breathed deeply, each inhale painful but steady. For years, I told myself, they made me small. But truth made them crumble. And crumble they did, their illusions falling apart piece by piece before my eyes. I wasn't the only one who saw it. The counselor and the nurse exchanged quiet looks, their expressions making it clear that the truth was undeniable. These weren't just my witnesses now, they were the world's witnesses. Ember's hand tightened around mine. He didn't need to speak. His calm strength stood as the opposite of their unraveling. I remembered Benjamin Franklin's words, ones I had once scribbled in the margins of a book. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. In that moment, I realized justice had already begun, not through lawyers or courts, but through truth finally spoken aloud, truth that others now carried with me. It wasn't complete yet, but it had started. And sometimes that's all justice needs, just a beginning. They retreated into silence, but this silence was different from the one they had used to erase me before. This silence was heavy, broken, stripped of power. They had nothing left to say, because the truth had already said it all. I sat in my chair, weak in body, but stronger in spirit than I had ever been. Watching them shrink back from the table, pale and exposed, I felt the shackles I had carried for years fall away. They came for an inheritance, I thought, my lips twitching into the faintest smile. All they inherited was the truth. But I knew this wasn't the end. The world outside these hospital walls would know, and once it did, there would be no going back. The collapse of their illusion was only the beginning of their downfall. The days following my mother's collapse were strangely quiet. No heated arguments in the hallways, no demands whispered sharply at nurses. The commotion had dissolved into fragments, an ambulance taking her to a different wing, Leora's voice cracking under pressure as she tried to mask panic, Cameron's scowl tightening as though the world owed him an explanation. Then, just silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that follows healing. It was the kind that grows out of brokenness. The kind you hear in abandoned houses where the walls remember what the people inside refuse to. I lay in my bed, feeling the weight of it seep into my bones. For the first time, I understood that it wasn't just my mother who had collapsed. It was the entire illusion of us as a family. I had always believed the bonds would hold, even if they bruised me. But now I saw them clearly for what they were. Frayed ropes, brittle threads, snapping under the strain of truth. And instead of grief, I felt something closer to release. I thought back over the years, the desperate meals I cooked to be noticed, the small victories at work that fell flat when compared to my siblings' staged successes. I had tried for so long to be enough, stretching myself thin, filling voids that weren't mine to fill. And yet, it was never about me being enough. It was about them never seeing. That realization didn't make the years of dismissal vanish, but it gave me clarity. It was like standing at the window of a smoky room and finally opening it to breathe. I repeated the truth in my mind. It was never about me being enough. It was about them never seeing. Sometimes I thought, you don't get closure. You just move on. And that's what I was beginning to do. Move on, even if my body was still strapped to machines, even if the scars were far from healed. I looked at Ember dozing in the chair again, his head tilted, arms crossed, but protective even in rest. He had no obligation to me, no blood tie, no shared history. And yet he was here. If family is a prison, I whispered to myself, then freedom is not losing them. It's leaving them. That thought rang in me with a strange steadiness. I realized I had begged for too long. Begged to be seen, to be heard, to be given scraps of belonging. And I vowed, right there in the sterile light of the ICU, never again. I would not beg for a seat at their table. My worth was not measured in a plate set for me. If they wanted me out, I would walk away on my own terms. Images of a different future started forming, a future without their manipulation, their cold shoulders, their indifference that cut deeper than open hostility. I pictured a life where Ember wasn't just a visitor in a hospital chair, but a friend in the ordinary days, a reminder of what chosen loyalty looks like. I thought about the nurse who held my letter and promised to guard it, proof that truth could be honored even when blood betrayed it. Family isn't always blood, I murmured, remembering the words I had once read. It's the people who want you in theirs. Empowerment trickled in quietly, not like fireworks, but like water finding its way through stone. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. I wasn't erased. Not anymore. Days passed, and my family did not return. Not to check on me, not to argue, not to pretend. The silence stretched long enough that it became its own answer. Instead of grief, I felt acceptance. Their absence no longer cut. It confirmed what I already knew. I whispered a goodbye to them one night, not with sorrow, but with release. "Goodbye," I said softly into the dim hospital room. "I hope you find what you're looking for, but it won't be me." I touched the memory of the letter, of the hairpin folded inside, symbols of truth I had claimed for myself. I didn't need them to hold me anymore. I had already given myself away, to honesty, to freedom, to the people who chose me. One evening, when Ember returned with coffee, I pressed my hand weakly against my chest. "They left me," I said, my voice steady, "but I am still here." He smiled gently, eyes steady. "Yes, you are." In that moment, I felt my heart beat stronger, not just as survival, but as defiance. Every beat said, "I exist, I matter, I refuse to vanish." From that moment, my life was mine alone. In the days that followed the collapse of my family's illusions, the hospital grew quieter. They never came back. No flowers, no phone calls, no hollow gestures to smooth over what had been exposed. Their absence was louder than their lies had ever been, but this time I wasn't crushed by it. Ember was still there, steady as ever, urging me to focus on healing, reminding me to breathe through the pain. I knew their silence was their last weapon, but I had already disarmed it. My truth had been spoken, and it was no longer mine alone to hold. Each beat of my heart felt like a declaration. I had survived their abandonment, their denial, their greed. Now I would survive for myself. The storm had passed, and in its wake there was calm, but it was the kind of calm that comes before a final strike. One morning, Ember showed me his phone. The recording of their words in the ICU, the moment they said I wasn't their daughter, had been leaked. I hadn't known someone captured it, but there it was. Their betrayal, laid bare for the world. The internet moved quickly. Neighbors began calling. Church members whispered. Colleagues from years past reached out in shock and outrage. Strangers sent messages, some offering prayer, others furious that a family could discard their own. "They wanted to bury me quietly," I whispered, watching the screen. Instead, their shame was broadcast. And for once, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. It wasn't long before the community called for answers. A gathering was organized in the church hall down the street from the hospital. My siblings couldn't hide from it. They were forced to attend, their reputations on the line. The room buzzed with whispers as they walked in. I was wheeled in last, Ember at my side. The stairs weren't for me, they were for them. Judgment sat heavy in the air, and for once, it wasn't pointed at me. I remembered a line I'd read years ago. "Reputation is what men and women think of us. Character is what God and angels know of us." Thomas Paine. In that moment, their reputation was crumbling, while my character stood taller than it ever had. I didn't need to say a word to feel vindicated. The truth had already spoken for me, but I chose to speak anyway. My voice, weak from days in bed, rose stronger than I expected. I faced the crowd, then my family. They said I wasn't family, I began. My words carried no tremor. Today, I say, I don't need to be. Gasps rippled across the hall. Leora's jaw clenched. Cameron shifted in his seat. Nick stared down at his hands. For years, I begged to belong, I continued. But belonging isn't worth the price of erasure. I was their daughter in name, but not in love, and I will not be claimed by those who cast me out. It was decisive, final. The power I had long surrendered was now mine to keep. Then came the final blow. Ember unfolded my letter and read portions aloud, his voice steady, unwavering. The words I had dictated in pain now echoed in strength. He held up the pearl hairpin, that cheap trinket turned into a symbol. This, he read, was given as a gift without love. Now it stands as proof that false promises will not define me. The crowd shifted, murmurs rising. And as for inheritance, Ember continued, Suzanne leaves nothing to those who abandoned her. Everything she has, material or otherwise, goes to those who stood by her. The gasp was collective. My siblings froze, powerless. Their eyes darted to the crowd, searching for sympathy, but there was none left. I watched their masks fall apart, their faces exposed. Vindication surged through me, not bitter, but triumphant. Justice wasn't in a courtroom. It was here, in this hall, in the truth no one could deny. When it was over, I felt lighter. My family had abandoned me, but chosen family had carried me through. Ember's hand on mine, the nurse who protected my letter, the community that bore witness, they had given me what blood never did. I thought of a line I once clung to in dark times. Sometimes letting go is the only way to survive. Unknown. Letting go hadn't killed me. It had saved me. They lost a daughter that day, I whispered, steady and sure. I found myself. And with those words, I closed the chapter on them and opened one for me.